he's going to keep them, So, I think that we can probably say that Darth Vader, the best candidate in terms of the ancient Sumerian gods, would have to be one of two people, Enki, as you suggested, who's kind of a mischievous troublemaker, or the character, or the Babylonian god Nergal, who is the god of Mars, war, and rebellion.
Yeah.
And incidentally also the god of the underworld, who, by the very nature of the case, turns against the rest of the pantheon. So, again, the parallels to the movie and some of these ancient myths, as you pointed out, are just kind of amazing. And to my mind, I don't think you'd get an insurance company be willing to draw up actuarial tables and take a bet on, what the probability is for all these parallels existing by coincidence.
Jeez, exactly. Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. Again, that you can look at those, and even those scenes, in the when you can see Luke Skywalker, and actually, when he stands looking out the desert, and you can see two suns. Again, right. This idea of some have said that this, the potential that the planet that exploded was as bright as the sun. Michael Tesserano talked about this, and others also, of course. Or even the fact that we, used to live in a binary solar system or something like that, but this is a lost star or a dark star basically at this point, and again, I guess this even connects with Sitchin's work about the 10th planet. This is something that comes and goes. I mean, again, there's so many connections here.
Yes, absolutely, and it's interesting you mentioned the double star in the movie, because this planet, it is entirely true that if this planet was of the same mass as Saturn, if it was a solid planet, then it would have been a very, very bright celestial body in the sky. So again, the correlations, the parallels, and so on, they're really rather amazing.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about the gods and potentially who they might be. We're handed fairly, as far as I know at least, fairly few names. When I look at it, I kind of see it as this is a fairly small group of people or beings or whatever we want to call them, gods, in quotations. Could this be kind of a small group, kind of a renegade, aliens, outlaws maybe from their own planet, or some have suggested that they've been chased throughout, the universe or throughout different solar system and ended up at this place? Any ideas on that?
Excellent question. I don't discount the idea that they may have been chased throughout the universe for a very important reason, and readers of the Cosmic War will see what those reasons are in the 5th chapter of the book. This physicist I mentioned earlier, Paul Laviolette, has proposed the idea that the arrangement of pulsars in the galaxy is not accidental. And he even goes so far as to propose that they may have functioned as some form of communications grid using entire stars, in other words, to do this. Again, that would point to a very sophisticated civilization with an enormous extent in local space. If we couple that idea to that of Iapetus, Hoagland's idea that it's an artificial body, then yes, we're dealing with something very similar. As to the number of these people, I tend to agree with you that this appears to be a very small, comparatively speaking, small group of people or gods or whatever you wish to call them. But there is another possibility that I should mention that I think deserves a hearing. And that is that we might be dealing, when we are referring to the names of these gods, really to a kind of a titular usage, like the Prince of Wales would be a titular usage. In other words, the name Tiamat may simply indicate the ruler or dynasty in charge of that particular planet. The name Nergal may mean the ruler or dynasty in charge of Mars, and so on and so forth. So we might be talking about the names of houses rather than individuals. And I think if we put it in that perspective, then we might be dealing with a slightly larger group of people, one that would make a little more sense in terms of this kind of cosmic war and its ongoing, almost family feudal nature. But yeah, either way one slices it, I think we're dealing with people at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, and therefore a very, very limited number.
Yeah. The other things that Hoagland has brought forth, like the face on Mars and even the pyramids, do you think that they actually are there, and that this is evidence for previous civilizations at that planet?
Yes, I do. I believe they're real. I believe that they are indicators of a civilization. And I should mention that Mr. Hoagland, I've been in contact with him in the last month and kind of swapping ideas back and forth. He has recently come out with a new book called Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA. And in it, he managed to convince one of his inside sources at NASA, who turns out to have been very highly placed, to come forward and share the photographs of some of the Apollo missions that he was ordered by NASA to destroy. And he did not do so. He kept them in a secret private archive, quite literally, and kept them from destruction. And in fact, I should point out to your listeners that Mr. Hoagland is actually having a conference in Washington, D.C. this coming Tuesday, where they're going to go over all of this.
Oh, right.
But one of the things that you will see in the book and in these photographs that are being made available for the first time is very clearly in the background of some of the pictures that were taken on the surface of the moon. You can very clearly see enormous, gigantic, crystalline-looking structures sticking up in the horizon. These are not artifacts of photography. These are not tricks of light and shadow. There's just no other way of interpreting them other than artificial structures. And the other thing I would point out that Mr. Hoagland has observed on some occasions, and he's written about this on his website, is that the D&M pyramid shows all the signs of having been deliberately targeted by some sort of very powerful directed energy weapon. And he also points out that many of the craters on Mars are simply far too shallow to be impact craters. They look more like they are the kinds of things that would result from extremely low burst nuclear weapons in the atmosphere or things of this sort. And on that basis, he entertains the idea that maybe these were the results of some war. And I find all this very interesting because one of the things I do in the cosmic war is that I point out that certain geological features on Mars, such as the enormous Valle Marineris, which is this huge, just enormous Grand Canyon-like structure, but it absolutely dwarfs the Grand Canyon for its size and scale. This is an enormous geological feature on Mars that the best explanation for was that it was created by enormous electrostatic arcing, in other words, by lightning, just literally gouging it out from the surface of the planet. And, you know, if we couple this idea to the ancient myths of the scarred warrior, and so on and so forth, then again, this would seem to be corroborative evidence that this was the result of a deliberate act of destruction. Because that geological feature, if you look at it, I reproduce a photo of it in the book, if you look at it, it's almost straight. You know, lightning in ordinary natural occasions doesn't arc and follow this nice, neat, tidy, straight path. But this does. And there are similar features on the moon where you have evidences of rills that were carved not by lava flows or water or any of this nonsense, but you can clearly see the little pits that are dug out in these rills that are precisely the signatures geologically of enormous electrostatic discharge. So again, we're confronted with something that, if we take the texts seriously about a war, would seem to indicate that they had weapons of extraordinary power and used them.
Wow, absolutely amazing. And when we're talking about also Hoagland's work here, and the NASA space program, this opens up, another can of worms here.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to begin with is this idea that I think Hoagland had this up on his website a while back. This was a picture, basically, that NASA released from one of their, basically like a promo poster with the two of their astronauts walking around on Mars.
Right.
Walking up to this hillside, and in the front, in the foreground of the picture, just to the right, you could actually see ancient structures that looked kind of, mix, I guess, between some kind of South American, but yet kind of, Persian looking, basically, the structures. Did you see that picture?
I recall vaguely that I did. It's been a while.
And, the question is, why would they do a thing like that,
Well, I think it's to the point now, Henrik, that the evidence that Mr. Hoagland and his associates have compiled and released in the 20-some years that he's been investigating this, I think it's to the point that the preponderance of the evidence and the case that he's been making, particularly now that his new book is out and these new Apollo photos are finally made public.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, I should point out that the man who did this has subsequently been fired from his job at NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California.
Yeah.
So, this to me is the smoking gun. NASA has, I think, now been forced, and probably because of his work over the years, to adopt this policy of gradual release. And I think this is probably what you're seeing with that picture and some of the others that they've released. A few years ago, the idea that NASA would have released the pictures of Iapetus would have been just unheard of. They would have doctored them and then released it. But now they're not even bothering anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the fact that he has spent an enormous amount of time and a considerable amount of money in taking some of their previously released and doctored pictures and demonstrating the fact that they have been doctored.
Yeah.
And I think it's the end game as far as NASA's policy of secrecy goes. I don't think that they're going to be able to play quite the same game with him anymore.
Huh. Interesting. Another thing, a very, simple idea about the moon, for instance. Why haven't, anyone been back there? I mean, it's been so many years now. What's going on?
Well, I tend to, that's the $64 trillion question if we allow for inflation. The truly stunning thing to me is that both the United States and the Soviet Union, which clearly had the technology to go there, that in the United States case, we just stopped. And that in the Soviet Union's case, they just sort of gave up inexplicably.
Yeah.
And I can't find any good, plausible explanation for it other than what Hoagland himself has offered, and that is that when we went there on the Apollo missions and certain Luna missions, unmanned probes that the Russians launched, when we got there, we just could not possibly have not seen, those astronauts could not have not seen these enormous structures. And this fact, and the fact that the astronauts who went there seem unable, curiously, to recall any specific details of what they saw there, I think indicates that the missions were simply too dangerous to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And